al-Islamiyyah tonight revisits our strong association with the Tariq Rajab Museum. We have to thank Dr. Ziad and His Excellency, the Hungarian Ambassador, for reminding us of our mutual friend, the late Professor Dr. Geza Farabari. Professor Geza contributed so much to the Dar's cultural seasons, and with him, after Kuwait's liberation, we set up the organizational pattern for the future consecutive seasons. Furthermore, it became the custom to inaugurate every season with a lecture given from him as curator of the Tariq Rajab Museum, delivering the first lecture. This simple gesture was an appreciation of that museum's founder, Mr. Tariq Said Rajab. Tonight's lecture will be one of Professor Geza's proteges. He called her his first daughter, Manijeh Bayani Wolpert. I hope I didn't torture your name. Sometimes our lecture series features a series within series. Tonight is the third that deals with a way or the other with various features of the Arabic script. Our first lecture on this topic was Christian Robin's presentation of pre-Islamic origins of early Arabic script that was used primarily for inscriptions on stones. This was followed by Ella and George, who discussed the development of the Arabic script that arose with the Holy Quran as a necessity for accuracy as the Islamic world grew outside the borders of the Arabian Peninsula. No longer inscriptions on stone, the Arabic script became bound in mushaf in several languages as Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish. This evening, in a lecture entitled Precious Books on Their Travels in the Arabian and Indian Worlds, our speaker, Manijeh Bayani Wolpert, is an independent scholar who has been based in London since 1969. She specializes in Arabic and Persian epigraphy and studied at the University of Tehran, where she earned a degree in art and archaeology, as well as studied in the Gulbistan Library. Manijeh Bayani has made important contributions to the catalogs of the Nasser Khalili collection of Islamic art. Her association with al-Athar al-Islamiyyah goes back to the early days of the museum, and she has written about aspects of the collection in many publications, particularly in her specialization. Many of these books were co-authored with other historians. Among them, Adel Adamova, the eminent scholar from the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, are Persian paintings, the arts of the book and portraiture, which deals with miniature paintings and manuscripts from the Sabah collection. Dr. Adamova also has spoken here. In fact, many of our scholars who have given lectures here have contributed with her publications. These include this season's Tim Stanley of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Dr. Stanley spoke about Ottoman firearms. However, more dangerous than any weapon to any speaker here at this theater in the Yarmouk Cultural Center are the devices you have on your person. So please turn them off and let's welcome Manijeh Bayani Wolpert.
Before anything else, I have to say I'm really honored to be here on an occasion when Geza is being remembered. I didn't know anything about it. And as I was mentioned, I knew him since 1969 and was on his first excavation in Iran, in Gobera. And we traveled to Afghanistan together, and our history goes back a long way. So I'm very pleased to be here on such an occasion. And Thank you, Dr. Badr Beijan, for your kind introduction. My sincere thanks go to Sheikha Hossa for inviting me, to Sukauji for her constant encouragement, help, and support, both in China at the moment, and to all the staff at the collection for providing me with whatever I have needed in the many years I've been coming to Kuwait, including the images for this talk, and always with a smile. We often look at manuscripts displayed in museums, in catalogues, admire the paintings. For example, an early catalogue, an early 16th century Khamsa of Nizami, one of the most popular Persian texts, copied and illustrated. Here we see Bahram, in the turquoise pavilion and in the white pavilion. We marvel at the fine illuminations, jewel-like, really, illuminations, and the styles of writing. At times, we are even intrigued by what was depicted in scenes, or even shocked by some explicit representations. Occasionally, we may be interested to learn for whom they were made and to find out who copied or illuminated them and where the work was carried out. But we hardly question how these manuscripts made their way from the places where they were created to museums and collections, sometimes far from their place of origin. I have been privileged to visit Al-Sabah collection for many years and observed objects that are immensely beautiful and without any blemish. In the collection of their manuscripts, however, I have found notes, smudged seal impressions, and apparently careless markings that are in great contrast to the aesthetic quality of their calligraphy and illuminations, as you see here. It is my task this evening to invite you to consider these apparently careless scribbles, clumsy defacements, and additions, and how they can contribute to our appreciation of the biography of these manuscripts. Here, for the sake of simplicity, I've tried to give dates in Christian or Common Era. I must also mention that my talk is based on my work on the Iranian and Indian world. We know that knowledge was revered and widespread throughout the Islamic world, and numerous academies founded, such as the Nizamiyyah Madrasa. Here we see Layla and Qais in a mixed school. Qais is the one later known as Majnun, from a Khamsa of Nizami. Going back to the Nizamiyyah Madrasa, which was founded in Seljuk period in the 11th century, we are told that it had 3,000 students. We also know that libraries were established by rulers, religious institutions, and even private individuals. Numerous libraries are recorded as early as the 9th century in various cities of Iran. What and how many manuscripts they held and how they were kept. For example, that of the Buids, scholar and statesman, or Grand Vizier of Wazir Sahib ibn Abbad, recorded as having had 1,017,000 manuscripts in his library. with its catalogue of 10 volumes. He made his library waqf as a public library in the 10th century, which was called Darul Kutub of Ray. Acquiring a manuscript was the pride of any owner, particularly if it was copied by a well-known scribe and finely illuminated, or in certain cases, illustrated. A story which shows the esteem in which rulers held their collection and the appreciation of the work of famous calligraphers is given by the 13th century historian Yaqut al-Hamawi. He quotes an earlier text, now lost, about what the famous late 10th, early 11th century calligrapher Ibn al-Bawwab at the Persian court of the Bu'id had told him. Ibn al-Bawwab was given permission to look at all the manuscripts in the Royal Library of Baha'u'llah in Shiraz and found 29 sections of a 30-section Quran manuscript by the earlier well-known calligrapher Ibn Mughla. He was offered a robe of honor and 100 dinars to copy Ibn Mughla's missing section and complete the 30-section Quran manuscript, with permission to use whatever he needed in the Royal Library. He searched for the right paper, copied the missing section, found an old binding for it, and took the new complete 30 sections to Baha'u'llah and asked him if he could distinguish the one he had copied from those of Ibn Mughla. When the ruler failed to do so, he told Ibn Bawwab that he would be granted whatever he wished. Can you guess what he asked for? Only old paper. And we can imagine what he would use it for. More fake copies. Shiraz was one of the cities in Iran with many libraries as early as the 10th century. Abul Faraj Isfahani in the Kitab al-Aqani reports that Azad ad-Dawlah's library had every known book of his time in his library, and they were arranged according to subject and title and kept in different rooms. The value of manuscripts was such that libraries were among the first to be looted in time of war. Examples abound of libraries in Iran that were taken, such as the Shrine Library in Mashhad, which was appropriated by the Uzbeks, and the libraries of Tabriz and Ardabil seized by the Ottomans in the 16th century, and those of Russians seized from Ardabil Shrine in the early 19th century. In the 18th century, the spoil of the sack of Delhi by Nader Shah, the Afsharid ruler of Iran, not only brought jewels and gems, such as the famous Darya-i-Nur diamond, or Sea of Light, to Iran, but also camel loads of precious manuscripts, many of which are now in the Golestan Palace Library in Tehran. Manuscripts in libraries, particularly of royal ones, originated from different sources, such as inheritance, special commissions, gifts, spoils of war, or purchase. Many, including rulers, bestowed a manuscript as a gift on their chosen individual or vice versa, possibly to please their rulers. They also donated manuscripts to mosques, which were often centers of learning, or to holy institutions as a pious gesture, or to make them available to general public. A typical example is the Shrine Library in Mashhad, where numerous rulers, such as the Mughal Emperor Jahangir and Qutb Shahi rulers Muhammad and Abdullah, have donated, made waqf manuscripts. Also, individuals from different parts of the Islamic world have endowed manuscript and the content of their entire libraries, and still do so to this day. It now holds over 155,000 manuscripts, not mentioning printed books, which is recorded as over 3.5 million. Many scholarly books and articles have been written about where and for whom a particular painter or calligrapher worked. But not much attention has been given to the added notes and their significance in relation to the manuscript, except when the manuscript has notes or seal impressions of rulers. The most comprehensive study of notes and seal impression in manuscript is by the American scholar John Seiler, who listed over 250 manuscripts that were in the Mughal Royal Library, and is the most important source for further study on the history, biography of individual manuscripts that were once in the Mughal royal libraries. The only article I know of that has provided a brief history of a manuscript is the Chakman and Tanindi, who dealt with manuscripts in the Topkapi Palace Library only in the context of Ottoman and Safavid relations. Notes and seal impressions can be on the recto of the opening pages. The colophon page, that is to say where the scribe signs his name and says when he completed the work. The verso, the back of the last folio, or fly leaves, the blank folio before or after the main text. They are usually placed at random with no obvious order of time or place, and are written by different members of the Royal Library staff or even private owners, except for notes written by Mughal emperors, which are usually on the recto of the opening folio and written in a larger hand than other notes. In general, these notes and seal impressions can tell us about the ownership of manuscript prior to it entering a particular library, whether it was a gift, purchased, a description of the manuscript, its value, inspection notes, endowment, waqf notes, later owner's names, birth registers, and in the case of the Mughals, its classification, and whether it was entrusted to a specific librarian who was identified by name, as well as the transfer from one librarian to another, added to which is the importance of seal impressions, their shape, size, the text, and the style of writing, which not only help us with identification, they are also basis for the study of seals in general. The renowned scholar François de Roche, who worked on early Quran manuscripts, gives the earliest known note which records the birth of a child dated to the 9th century. The earliest endowment note we know of in a Quran manuscript are those of the governor of Damascus, Amajor al-Turki, dated to the second half of the 9th century. And there are 2 others endowed in the 10th century. I must also add that the Shrine Library in Mashhad holds numerous waqf notes dating back as early as the 10th century. To register one's child's birth in a Quran manuscript must have been considered a form of asking God to protect the child. In Iran, this was always followed by a prayer, a tradition that continued not only in Quran manuscripts, also in literary texts, up to the introduction of birth certificates in Iran in the early 20th century. Interestingly, the earliest documentation of ownership that I have come across is in Rashiduddin Fazlullah's Jami' al-Tawarikh, Compendium of Chronicles, composed for the Ilkhanid ruler of Iran in the early 14th century, and considered the first history of the world as it covers from China to Europe. A copy in the Topkapi Palace Library features a few owners' names, datable between the time of its production in the second decade of the 14th century to when it entered the library of Shah Rukh, the Timurid ruler of Iran and the patron of arts, with his capital in Herat, where Shah Rukh's library seal impression is seen. Other notes include the name of Chupan, a known statesman, and the birth of a child, dating from the middle of the 14th century. These are the only ones mentioned, although one assumes that there must be more about the full history of this manuscript. Surely there must be many more manuscripts that bear owners' names, their seal impressions, or other documentations. Fortunately, Al-Sabah collection holds several important manuscripts which provide us with information as to places they were in before they reached Kuwait. I have chosen 4 from the Iranian world to illustrate and discuss here tonight. The first of the 4 that illustrate what these notes can provide is parts of a section from the most beautifully copied and illuminated Quran manuscript, and I suppose you agree with me, which was probably produced in the capital city of the Ghaznavid, Ghazni, now in modern Afghanistan, in the second half of the 11th century. There is no record of his whereabouts until the mid-17th century, when it was presented to the Safavid ruler Suleiman by a son of an ex-minister. And that is the note. A few years later, it was inspected, and a short physical description of the manuscript was written, which informs us that of the contents, being chapters Sowar, I'm sure you can read some, the style Kufi, the size, large size, type of paper, Samarkandi, the cover, which is described as worn, musta'mal, and attributes the hand of that to the 4th Shi'i Imam, Zain al-Abidin. The description of the cover clearly shows that its present cover is a replacement. The attribution of this manuscript to the 4th Shi'i Imam is based on an oral account, while many that bear colophons stating that they were copied by various Shi'i Imams have been regarded by scholars as spurious. But these must have been endorsed by the Safavid Shia dynasty of Iran once they entered their libraries. There are also a few with alleged notes written by the early 16th century Safavid ruler Ismail, who made the 12 Imam Shi'ism the official religion in Iran. These were made waqf to holy shrines only in the mid-20th century. In simple terms, faked. And there are a few in the art market at the moment. Apart from inspection notes, there is also a note dated 1700, recording that the manuscript was handed down to Prince Dawood, the grandson of Shah Suleiman, and gives more information about the original gift to the Safavid Royal Library, and that this manuscript was presented to the deceased king together with 1 robe valued at 1 tuman and 9,000 dinars, and a pen box made by Bahram, who may be one and the same as the pupil of the most famous painter Behzad. Because of the political upheaval of the 18th century in Iran, it is not possible to say if the manuscript was kept with the Safavids or if it entered the Afsharid Royal Library when it was inspected in the middle of the 18th century. Those are the notes. And where it remained for 30 years when it was purchased by a certain Ahmad. Here. A later owner gave it to an individual, that's in the early 19th century after a dream which the fourth Imam, the assumed scribe of this manuscript, had appeared to him. Additional interesting information found in two notes mentions that the manuscript comprised of 73 folios. It now consists of only 22 folios. So the manuscript lost 51 folios between 1806 and 1981, when it was acquired by the Al-Sabah collection. From these few notes, we understand that this manuscript traveled from Ghazni in Afghanistan to Isfahan, and from there to a private owner somewhere in Iran, from where it reached Europe and finally found its home in Kuwait. The second manuscript I have chosen is Kitab al-Sihah fil-Lugha of al-Johari, a lexical work. It was copied in Shiraz in the middle of the 14th century for the library of Sheikh Abu Ishaq, the Inju ruler of southern Iran, as given in the Shamsa. His name appears here, but ended up in India some 150 years later, as it features the dated circular seal impression of the library of Sultan Mahmud Shah of Gujarat in the city of Muhammadabad. The manuscript includes a number of defaced notes, including a waqf note and blackened seal impressions, most probably of Mahmud Shah's librarians, and that the subsequent owner had blackened or defaced. Judging from the inspection notes, dated between 14, and these are all the inspection notes, dated between 1504 and 1528, the manuscript stayed in the Sultanate Royal Library until it entered the library of an unidentified individual with no given name. There is also a 19th century birth register as well. So this manuscript, copied in Shiraz, traveled to the court of the Sultans of Gujarat in India, was given as a waqf, was in a private library, either in Iran or India, then possibly made its way to other places, including the European art market, before reaching Kuwait. The third manuscript is a copy of the Khamsa of Nizami, with its jewel-like illumination and its fine illustrations. Here we see Farhad, the sculptor, being introduced to Shirin, and here Shirin committing suicide over the coffin of Khosrow. It was also copied in Shiraz and completed in the second half of the 15th century, featuring various seal impressions and library notes. The earliest datable impression is the small seal impression, this one, a small lobed drop-shaped seal of the Aqoyanlu prince Masih Mirza, son of Uzun Hassan, who after the death of Sultan Yaqub was chosen as his successor. but he was rebuked and finally killed in 1490. The gap of maximum 3 years between its production and the death of the prince must indicate that its first owner was the Aqoyanlu prince. Many circular seal impressions of the 15th century type were deliberately defaced throughout the manuscripts and are most likely those of the Aqoyanlu Royal Library. The manuscript was in another royal library, most likely the Safavids, and was inspected a few times in the first half of the 16th century, and the dates may indicate that it was taken by the Safavids after their capture of Shiraz in 1504. In the 17th century, the manuscript was clearly in a religious institution, as can be inferred from the legend on the seal impression of a certain Muhammad Ali, Khadem Fuqara, servant of the needy, added to which the word waqf that appears on folio 1 recto. By the 18th century, it was a property of certain Shah Abdur Rahim, over there, who must have worked in a Sufi shrine, as his seal reads, Abdur Rahim Shah is from the lineage of the Prophet. He is thus a servant on the dust of the master's threshold. We can assume that he was a devotee of a Sufi whom he calls Aqa, master, and at whose astane, tomb, he considered himself a servant. The shape of the later seals, gilding of the forage, the outer 3 edges of the page of a book, the invocation to Kabikaj, the king of cockroaches, to protect the manuscript against insects that was most popular in India, and the added explanations of difficult words within the manuscript with references to Jamaluddin Inju's 17th century dictionary, Farhang Jahangiri, all points to the fact that the manuscript had reached India by the 18th century, if not earlier. All pre-18th century seals were deliberately defaced, a practice common even today, to remove traces of previous ownership, particularly if a manuscript was acquired in a not entirely legitimate manner. In short, this copy of the Khamsa, which was also produced in Shiraz in 1488, belonged to the Aqoyanlu prince, was taken by the Safavids after the capture of Shiraz, and was inspected in the royal library in the first half of the 16th century, was in a religious institution. It subsequently changed hands and was restored and trimmed to its present size in the second half of the 19th century in India. The various added notes, explanation of difficult words, and corrections in the margins indicate that it was being prepared as a prototype for another copy or as a teaching copy. The last manuscript I wish to speak about is the most interesting one in the collection, if not in the world, not only in its quality of calligraphy, illumination, or illustrations, but in terms of seal impressions and notes. It is Sopatul Abrar, the Rosary of the Pious, the 4th book of the Haft Orang, the 7 Thrones of Jami, composed in honor of the Timurid ruler of Herat, Sultan Hussein Mirza, in the second half of the 15th century. If you'd like to know what it represents, is that it depicts the tale of a man dreaming that the angels were coming down with gifts. He asks them where they were going, and they say that Sadi, the Persian poet of Shiraz, has composed a couplet in praise of God, for which we are going to reward him. He goes to see Sadi and sees him dancing while repeating this couplet. And you can see the angels showering him with gold. The scribe of this manuscript, Mahmud ibn Ishaq, came from Herat, but together with other artists was forced to move to Bukhara after the capture of the city by the Uzbeks in the early 16th century. A word should be said about the scribe Mahmud and his handwriting, which has always been praised, particularly in his imitation of Mir Ali, who was considered the best and most celebrated calligrapher of Nastaliq, the style in which this manuscript was written. No other pupil of Mir Ali reached such perfection, and it has been even said that he surpassed his master. An anecdote recorded by Mir Ali states that when he complained that he had taught Mahmud everything, and that now whatever he wrote, whether good or bad, he signs himself as Mir Ali. In response, Mahmud is recorded as having said, "My Lord is wrong in saying good or bad, because I only sign in his name when I write badly." Going back to the manuscript, whether Mahmud copied this manuscript while in Herat or Bukhara is not clear, as the completion date has been tampered with. In any case, the architectural inscriptions show that it was illustrated in Bukhara and dedicated, as the text on the opening Shamsa indicates, to the Uzbek or Shaybanid ruler Abdullah II, who impressed his dated seal in the manuscript. It is that one. It is worthy of note that this seal impression has not been seen or published so far and remains unique. The manuscript was in India. As indicated by a valuation note with the date, which comes to 1601, that is Akbar's period. When and how the manuscript reached India is not clear. There is a maximum of 31 years between the date of Abdullah's seal and the valuation date of Akbar's library note. Since there were no Mughal incursions into the Khanate territories under Akbar, it is very likely that this manuscript was one of the many gifts sent to Emperor Akbar by Abdullah and described by Akbar's historian Abul Fazl as the rarities of that country. Here I must mention that we are fortunate enough to have detailed information about Mughal royal libraries. For example, we are told by contemporary sources that when Emperor Babur took Melwat and reached the library of Qazi Khan, he removed the valuable books and gave them to his eldest son Humayun as a gift, and sent the others to his second son, Kamran, to Kabul. Humayun was a great lover of books and libraries, and it was in his Shirmandal library, which he had built, that he fell from a ladder and received severe injuries, which led to his death. It's also reported that Humayun lost 2 camel loads of books traveling with him on his battle against his brother Kamran, and when later the camels were found with the books in perfect condition, he's quoted as saying, "It was the occasion for 1,000 rejoicing." Emperor Akbar founded a few libraries which contained numerous valuable manuscripts, including, as I said, what he had inherited from his father, those he had acquired in his various campaigns, and those he commissioned, as well as those he received as gifts. We are told The Royal Library was situated in the fort of Agra and contained 24,000 beautifully bound manuscripts. Here I would like to quote Abul Fazl, Akbar's contemporary historian. His Majesty's library is divided into several parts. Some books are kept within, meaning in private quarters, and some without the harem. Each part of the library is subdivided according to the value of the books and the estimation in which the sciences are held. Prose books, poetical works, Hindi, Persian, Greek, Kashmiri, and Arabic are all separately placed. In this order, they are also inspected. Badauni, a historian and translator working at the court of Akbar, writing about Feyzi's library, another official of Mughals, records that after his death in 1594, his 4,600 valuable bound books were presented to the emperor, who had them catalogued in 3 sections, giving the first place to books of verse, medicine, astrology, and music. The second to works on philosophy, religious mysticism, astronomy, and geometry. And the lowest place to commentaries, the traditions, book on theology, and all other subjects connected with the sacred law. We are told also that the floor of the Mughal library buildings was kept spotlessly clean and free from damp. The architects and engineers were also to make proper provisions for light and air. The libraries were so well arranged that any books could be found in a short time. Special attendants and experts were employed to clean and dust the books periodically and to see that they were not soiled by weather or worn out by use and age or eaten away by bookworms or spoiled in any other way. These experts removed the dust from the books and turned every page of the books during their inspections. Thus, the many notes we find, it says, inspected. The library division under Akbar implies that each section was put under the custody of a different librarian, as it is in this 16th century Quran manuscripts in the collection, copied by a Shirazi calligrapher, Abdul Qadir, whose work was sought after by courts from India in the east to Ottoman Turkey in the west. The 3 mentioned custodians of this manuscript, from Emperor Jahangir to Shah Jahan period, were clerics: Mullah Muwajjah, Mullah Arastu, and Mullah Waqif. Transfers from one librarian to another or appointing a certain librarian was authorized by the seal of a high official, usually the Daruqe or superintendent, who was a man of letters, a well-read and accomplished person acquainted with both the sciences and the arts. He had to purchase, arrange, and classify the books according to their subject matters and performed his duties with the help of a number of assistants. The clerk who worked under him maintained up-to-date registers for separate subjects, and each assistant was in charge of his own section as subject, as we see here. Such an organization was indeed needed for a library with 24,000 volumes, of course. Now back to Sobhat al-Abrar. The manuscript was inspected and put in the custody of various librarians during the reigns of Emperor Jahangir in the early 17th century through to the reign of Shah Alam in the 18th century. Many of these notes were authorized by the seals of superintendents. All these notes gives, as you say, he said, from Mullah Saleh to Chalabi Khan. And in the others, there are more. They name the librarians, and that is very important, how important the librarians or custodians were. There are also grading notes under Emperor Shah Jahan, one of which classifies this manuscript as royal, first class, second grade. Later, however, its value is raised from 50 to 60 more being a gold coin. And it was classified as first. There are also 2 notes of unspecified date, giving the number of folios as 128, exactly as they are today. Here, I would like to introduce the seal of one official who may be known to you, that of Abdul Haq Shirazi, better known as Amanat Khan. This one. The calligrapher of the inscriptions of the Taj Mahal in Agra, commissioned by Emperor Shah Jahan to house the tomb of his beloved wife and one of the most famous and praised monuments in India. This manuscript must have been one of the many manuscripts the Afsharid ruler Nadir Shah took back to Iran after his sack of Delhi in 1739 and was later moved from the seat of Nadir in Kalat-e-Nadiri in Khorasan to the Qajar Library in Tehran, as indicated by the seal. It's not clear because it's covered with gold, as indicated by the seal of the Qajar ruler Fath Ali Shah. How the manuscript left Iran is not known, but since then it's been in the Dekram Kalekian collection, was exhibited in 1940 Persian exhibition in New York, was in Jacob Kevorkian collection before being auctioned at Sotheby's London in April 1980, when it was acquired by the Al-Sabah collection. As you can see, this manuscript traveled great distances, possibly from Herat to Bukhara to Agra, and Delhi in India to Kalat-e-Nadiri and Tehran in Iran, possibly to Istanbul and Paris because Kalekian had bases in these cities, to New York and London, and finally to Kuwait. It was particularly valued and treasured by many and has been cared for by Al-Sabah collection and published for more people to appreciate it in the future. From the studied manuscripts of Iranian worlds, what can so far be understood is that the tradition of marking possessions of manuscripts goes back at least the 15th century Timurid period, a practice that was particularly observed in Shah Rukh's library. Following the Timurids, the Aqoyanlus, the Uzbeks, the Safavid left their seal impressions, the latter also with inspection notes and added comments such as description of manuscript. The Sultanate rulers and Mughals of India, like the Safavids, wrote inspection notes and added their seal impression. However, none of the above matches the systematic attention given to manuscripts that one finds in the Mughal royal libraries. If I have managed to engage your interest in the journeys that these manuscripts have been on, it becomes clear that these apparently inartistic scribbles are actually an important source of information on the biography of manuscripts. And as we look or possibly turn the pages to read the text or admire the illumination or illustrations, we are allowed to feel that our admiration and pleasures is in a great tradition of the proud earlier owners and a modest continuation of this great heritage. Thank you.